Did you know that during World War II, the Nazis created a secret society devoted to proving that the Aryan race was a direct descendant of the gods, and that this organization funded expeditions across the world in search of mystical relics, lost scriptures, and proof of the so-called spiritual superiority of the Germanic people? Its name was Ahnenerbe, which means heritage of the ancestors. Founded in 1935, it emerged in one of the darkest periods of modern history. While the world prepared for chaos, something even more dangerous was growing within Germany, a mystical belief that humanity's destiny was written in ancient ruins and among the stars. Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS and Hitler's right-hand man, was obsessed with the occult. He believed that modern science had forgotten ancient truths, and that the secret to absolute power could be rediscovered by studying Nordic myths and lost civilizations. And so the Ahnenerbe was born, part archaeological institute, part occult laboratory, part secret cult, all serving one mission: to prove that the Germans were the heirs of a prehistoric, superior civilization. But what began as research would soon become something far more sinister. To understand how, we must first understand the ideology behind it. At the heart of Nazi belief was the idea of a sacred origin, a myth that the Aryan people had descended from a pure divine lineage. If they could scientifically prove that their race came from an ancient civilization of advanced beings, their political ambitions would no longer seem like conquest, but destiny. And when ideology dresses itself as science, lies can be turned into facts. Himmler wanted more than propaganda. He wanted proof, tangible, measurable, and irrefutable. He envisioned a vast institution where scientists, historians, and mystics worked side by side to uncover the buried evidence of the Reich's mythical past, a place where history itself could be rewritten in the image of the regime. At first, it all looked legitimate. The Ahnenerbe had officers, professors, and official seals, but behind the facade of scholarship was something else, an engine of manipulation, where data was twisted to serve belief, and belief was turned into justification for domination. Soon the Ahnenerbe began to move. Its agents set out on expeditions that spanned continents, from the caves of Europe to the mountains of Tibet, from the Mediterranean ruins to the deserts of the Middle East. They weren't searching for history, they were hunting for validation. They looked for anything that could prove their myth, skulls that might demonstrate racial superiority, ancient symbols that could be linked to Germanic runes, forgotten temples that could be reinterpreted as the lost cities of the Aryan gods. And if the evidence didn't exist, they would find a way to create it. In the early years, the expeditions were presented as academic missions, but the deeper they went, the darker they became. Villages were stripped of their relics, sacred artifacts disappeared into private collections, and samples were taken from human remains, from bones, from living people, all in the name of racial science. Those who resisted were silenced. Those who cooperated often vanished. Inside Germany, the Ahnenerbe grew into a sprawling institution with over 50 departments: anthropology, linguistics, medicine, astronomy, and even studies on witchcraft and telepathy. Each had the same purpose: to provide scientific support for Nazi racial theory. But beneath this network of academics lay a web of fear and control. Himmler personally oversaw many of its projects. He viewed the Ahnenerbe as the key to legitimizing the Reich's destiny, a bridge between the material and the mystical. He ordered the construction of Wewelsburg Castle, the SS headquarters, as both a fortress and a temple. There, ceremonies were held that blended Norse mythology with Nazi ideology, rituals meant to awaken the ancient spirit of the Aryan race. The Ahnenerbe supplied the ideology that justified conquest. If the Germans were the rightful heirs of the earth, then domination wasn't cruelty, it was restoration. That logic infected everything. Archaeology became propaganda, science became weaponized, and truth itself became negotiable. In their quest for proof, the Ahnenerbe blurred every moral line. They sought out myths of Atlantis, believing it to be the cradle of Aryan civilization. They collected ancient maps that showed Antarctica without ice, convinced it was evidence of a vanished northern homeland. Every story, every legend that hinted at lost wisdom was seized, twisted, and used to construct a single narrative: that the Germans were not merely men, they were descendants of gods. But beneath the grandeur of this vision lay a brutal reality. Where the Ahnenerbe went, cultures were stripped bare, artifacts stolen, histories rewritten, entire peoples redefined according to a fantasy that justified their subjugation. In the name of proving superiority, they erased the very diversity that made history rich. As the war intensified, so did their obsession. The Ahnenerbe began experiments that crossed the line from pseudoscience to pure horror. Human subjects were measured, dissected, and tortured, their suffering reduced to data points in studies designed to confirm racial theory. And in Himmler's eyes, it was all progress. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. The Ahnenerbe wasn't searching for knowledge, it was searching for permission. Permission to destroy, to conquer, to enslave, all wrapped in the illusion of discovery. When power hides behind the mask of science, evil doesn't look like madness. It looks like order. By the late 1930s, the organization had become a world within a world, its own budgets, its own rules, its own faith. Scientists who once pursued truth now pursued survival, feeding the machine that had promised them prestige. Some believed they were serving history, others knew exactly what they were doing, and yet none of them could see what lay ahead, because in their attempt to resurrect the past, they were building the foundation for one of the darkest crimes in human history. The Ahnenerbe started as a quest for origins, but it became a weapon to erase them. A system built to find the divine ended up proving only how deeply humanity could fall. In the next chapter, we follow their most ambitious missions, the expeditions to Tibet, Egypt, and South America, where myth met war, and where science crossed into superstition, in ways that would echo long after the Reich was gone. After its founding, the Ahnenerbe grew into more than a research institute. It became a movement, a secret order of scholars, explorers, and soldiers united under a single obsession to uncover physical proof that the Aryan race was not merely human, but divine in origin. Their laboratories were filled with maps of forgotten continents, rune-carved stones, and ancient manuscripts no one had read for centuries. But for Himmler, evidence wasn't found in books alone. It had to be dug up, photographed, and claimed, and so the world became their excavation site. It began quietly. In the late 1930s, small teams were sent to Scandinavia to study Viking runes and Norse burial grounds. They searched for any trace of a northern homeland, the mythical Thor, said to be the birthplace of the Aryan race. But the more they searched, the more their hunger grew. Soon, the Ahnenerbe wanted something bigger, something that would prove the legends were true. That proof, they believed, lay beyond Europe, in the ancient civilizations of the East. In 1938, an expedition left Germany under the leadership of Ernst Schaefer, a decorated zoologist and SS officer. Their destination, Tibet. Officially, it was a scientific mission to collect animal specimens and study local culture, but the real purpose was hidden behind layers of secrecy. Himmler believed that the Tibetan plateau might hold the last remnants of a forgotten civilization, the bridge between humans and gods. When Schaefer and his team arrived, they carried strange instruments, calipers for measuring skulls, reels of film for documentation, and sacred texts from the Reich. They moved through villages like missionaries of science, measuring the faces of monks, photographing their rituals, and collecting artifacts said to be thousands of years old. Locals watched in confusion as the Germans recorded every gesture, every chant, every symbol carved into temple walls. To them, it was anthropology. To Himmler, it was revelation. The Ahnenerbe believed Tibet could be the link between the Aryans and the mythic kingdom of Shambhala, a hidden land of wisdom described in Buddhist tradition. They twisted that legend, claiming it proved that Aryan knowledge had once ruled the East before vanishing into legend. Schaefer sent back reports filled with coded language and symbolic references, enough to convince Himmler that he was on the trail of divine ancestry. Among the relics the team collected were manuscripts, ritual masks, and bone trumpets used by monks in meditation ceremonies. But there were whispers that they found something else, artifacts that disappeared before the war's end, including a strange metallic disc inscribed with symbols that resembled Nordic runes. Some say it was sent directly to Wewelsburg Castle, where Himmler's occult circle studied it in private. Its fate remains unknown. By the time the Tibet mission returned to Berlin, it had become legend within the SS. The photographs were displayed as trophies, the relics were treated as sacred, and Schaefer, whether he believed the myths or not, was celebrated as the man who had touched the edge of the Aryan dawn. But Tibet was only the beginning. Encouraged by the illusion of discovery, the Ahnenerbe turned its gaze toward the west, to Egypt, Iraq, and South America, where ruins whispered of gods who came from the sky and vanished into the earth. In Egypt, SS archaeologists scoured the sands around the Great Pyramids, convinced that the pharaohs had inherited their power from Aryan ancestors who once ruled across continents. They studied hieroglyphs, looking for runic patterns, trying to rewrite Egyptian mythology to fit the Nazi narrative. They claimed that the builders of the pyramids were not Africans, but members of a forgotten northern race, and when scholars disagreed, they were silenced. Truth was no longer a matter of evidence, only belief. In Iraq, agents posing as researchers infiltrated ancient sites in Babylon and Nineveh, searching for proof that Germanic tribes had once migrated from the east. They hunted for clay tablets, relics, and inscriptions that could connect the Mesopotamian gods to the mythic Aryan forefathers. They believed even the Bible's stories, from Eden to the flood, were distorted memories of an Aryan civilization destroyed by time. Each discovery, no matter how trivial, was twisted into confirmation. Every ruin became a reflection of their myth, and every absence of proof became proof itself, evidence lost to history. But no mission would match the ambition or the mystery of the Ahnenerbe's rumored expeditions to South America. Though official records remain fragmentary, post-war testimonies suggest that German explorers reached the jungles of Brazil, Argentina, and Bolivia between 1939 and 1941. Their goal, to investigate legends of ancient cities said to be older than the Incas, cities connected, they believed, to the same lost civilization that had once ruled the north. There were stories of a hidden valley deep in the Andes where temples bore symbols identical to Nordic runes. Locals spoke of strange foreign men who arrived in military uniforms, carrying equipment marked with SS insignia, and left without explanation. Some said they searched for Viracocha, the Andean god of creation, a tall white-skinned figure said to have come from the sea to bring civilization. To the Ahnenerbe, that was all they needed to hear. In their minds, Viracocha was not a god, but an Aryan ancestor. What they didn't understand, or perhaps refused to, was that every culture has its own myths of creation, every people, a story of origin. But the Ahnenerbe turned those stories into weapons, reshaping them to serve their ideology, and in doing so, they stripped them of meaning. Behind these expeditions was more than curiosity. They were mapping something larger, a world history rewritten through the eyes of the Reich, a history where the Germans were the architects of every civilization, the bearers of every light, the gods behind every myth. And when they returned from their journeys, their findings were displayed not in museums of learning, but in halls of indoctrination. Students, officers, even children were taught that the evidence of their superiority had been proven by science. But within the Ahnenerbe itself, doubt began to grow. Some scientists realized that their research had become theater, that their discoveries were no longer theirs to interpret. A few attempted to withdraw. Most remained silent, terrified, because in the Reich, silence was survival. By 1940, as the war consumed Europe, the Ahnenerbe shifted its focus. The expedition slowed, replaced by projects closer to home, decoding ancient texts, experimenting with sound frequencies, and exploring psychic phenomena. Himmler believed that by combining ancient wisdom with modern technology, they could unlock powers beyond imagination, powers that could change the course of the war. In secret chambers beneath universities and castles, Ahnenerbe scientists conducted rituals that merged mysticism with science. They studied runes as if they were equations, believing they contained mathematical patterns that could manipulate energy. They experimented with sound vibrations, convinced that ancient chants could affect matter, and they delved into alchemy, not to turn lead into gold, but to turn ideology into faith. Each failed experiment only fueled their obsession. If they couldn't find the evidence they wanted, they would create it. In laboratories across Germany, relics were forged, data fabricated, and myths rewritten to fit the Reich's narrative. By the time truth could catch up, the world was already burning. The Ahnenerbe had transformed from seekers of knowledge into architects of illusion. They claimed to serve history, but in truth, they were burying it, one expedition, one lie, one discovery at a time. And as the front lines drew closer to Germany, their search for the divine origin would take a darker turn, from ancient ruins to human flesh. Because soon, the experiments would no longer take place in temples or deserts, but inside the concentration camps of Europe. As the world descended into the darkness of war, within the borders of Germany, the Ahnenerbe reached the height of its power. With unlimited access to the resources of the Third Reich, this secret society funded expeditions and experiments that pushed the boundaries of science and morality. But to understand the full scope of their obsession, we must explore the relics they were hunting. These were not simple artifacts, they were keys to absolute power. Among the most coveted treasures, the Holy Grail stood above all. Legend said the chalice used by Christ at the Last Supper held power over life and death. For Himmler, the Grail wasn't a religious symbol, it was a weapon. He believed that whoever possessed it could harness divine energy, the energy of the ancient gods. In 1936, under direct orders from the SS, archaeologists from the Ahnenerbe set out on a secret expedition to Montségur Castle in southern France, the last refuge of the Cathars, a Christian sect branded heretical by the Church. There, they believed the Grail had been hidden before the Catholic invasion in the 13th century. Eyewitnesses reported that the German team conducted nocturnal excavations, extracting sealed crates that were later sent straight to Wewelsburg Castle, the SS's spiritual headquarters. And that's where the story takes a darker turn. Wewelsburg wasn't just a castle, it was the temple of the new Aryan world. In its circular architecture, Himmler ordered the construction of an underground chamber, known as the Hall of the Black Knights. At its center lay a mosaic shaped like a black sun, a symbol of rebirth and world domination. Each SS officer was initiated there, through rituals inspired by the Templars and ancient Norse sagas, but the Grail wasn't their only objective. The Ahnenerbe also sought the Spear of Destiny, the weapon said to have pierced the side of Christ on the cross. Legend claimed that whoever held it could never be defeated in battle. In 1938, shortly before the annexation of Austria, Hitler personally visited Vienna's Hofburg Museum, and soon after, the spear mysteriously vanished. Documents from the time suggest it was transferred to Nuremberg under SS protection. Coincidence or prophecy fulfilled? Yet what made the Ahnenerbe truly dangerous wasn't its beliefs, but the methods it used to prove them. While archaeologists dug through temples in Tibet, scientists conducted brutal experiments on prisoners of war, searching for genetic proof of Aryan superiority. Men, women, and children were tortured in the name of myth, and all of it carried the official seal of the Reich's science. In 1938, the Ahnenerbe launched one of its most mysterious missions, the Tibetan expedition. Led by Ernst Schaefer, a zoologist and hunter, the team claimed to pursue scientific research. But the real mission was far more secret, to find the living descendants of Atlantis. The Nazis believed the Himalayas held the secrets of a lost civilization, a race of fair-skinned, blue-eyed beings who passed their wisdom to the first Aryans. For months, Schaefer's team studied Buddhist temples, measured skulls, traced genealogies, and brought back hundreds of artifacts and Tibetan manuscripts. Among them were texts describing the kingdom of Shambhala, a hidden paradise deep within the mountains, where enlightened masters awaited the return of the light. For Himmler, this was the confirmation he needed. The Third Reich would become the rebirth of Shambhala on Earth. As the front lines burned, inside the halls of the Ahnenerbe, a new conviction took root, the belief that the war was not just physical, but spiritual. And to win it, they had to master not only matter, but the unseen. Himmler created divisions dedicated to magic, runes, and symbols. The SS began using protective amulets, chants, and purification rituals before battle. To many officers, this wasn't superstition, it was strategy. But there was a price. Accounts from former Ahnenerbe members mentioned blood rituals, sacrifices, and attempts to summon ancient entities. They believed divine power could be drawn from pain and fear. Documents recovered after the war describe experiments with low-frequency sound, electromagnetic fields, and altered states of consciousness, all meant to open gateways to the Aryan gods. The most disturbing part, even after the fall of Berlin, many of these relics were never found. The Grail, the spear, and hundreds of manuscripts vanished. Some say they were destroyed by the Allies. Others claim they were secretly shipped to America under Operation Paperclip, along with SS scientists. But some whisper something far more chilling. That part of this knowledge was never lost, it was silenced. That Ahnenerbe research on vibration, energy, and human consciousness became the foundation for secret Cold War projects, and that much of what we now call advanced science was born from the mystical madness of the Third Reich. And so the relics of power ceased to be myths and became a hidden legacy, a legacy that still echoes in secret societies, corporations, and governments, all chasing what Himmler once pursued: control over the invisible, mastery over what cannot be seen, but can be felt. Because in the end, maybe the Ahnenerbe never disappeared, maybe it just changed its name, and what began as a search for gods ended with the most terrifying revelation of all: the real power was never in the relics, it was always within the ones who sought them. Did you know that beneath the mask of scientific research, the Ahnenerbe conducted some of the most horrific experiments in human history, experiments that blurred the line between science, sorcery, and madness? After 1941, when Germany invaded the Soviet Union and the war reached its bloodiest stage, Heinrich Himmler granted the Ahnenerbe full control over a network of laboratories, not in universities, but inside concentration camps. The victims were prisoners, Jews, Poles, Russians, Roma, and even German dissidents. To the Ahnenerbe, they were not people, they were specimens. It began with the so-called survival studies. In the frozen barracks of Dachau, scientists tried to simulate the conditions faced by Luftwaffe pilots shot down in the icy waters of the North Sea. Victims were placed naked in vats of freezing water, while electrodes measured their heart rate, brainwaves, and body temperature. The goal: to discover how long a human could survive before death, and how to bring them back from it. When the ice took too long, the water was stirred with paddles to create waves. Some victims begged for mercy, others stayed silent, staring into nothingness until their eyes glazed over. The records note the exact minute each heartbeat stopped. For the Ahnenerbe, data had been collected. In another building, experiments tested hypothermia recovery by submerging victims in boiling water or wrapping them in the bodies of living women to share warmth. To the researchers, this wasn't horror, it was innovation. But that was only the beginning. In the laboratories of Natzweiler and Ravensbrück, Dr. August Hirt, one of the Ahnenerbe's most fanatical scientists, conducted anatomical research to preserve specimens of the Jewish race. He selected hundreds of prisoners for execution, ordering their bodies to be prepared for a racial skeleton collection. The idea was to prove, through physical measurements, that Jews were an inferior species. Hirt's laboratory became a museum of death. When the Allies liberated the camp, they found dozens of bodies, decapitated, dissected, labeled with numbers. Some still had traces of cyanide gas in their lungs. Meanwhile, other Ahnenerbe divisions focused on biological resilience and mind control. They wanted to create soldiers immune to pain, hunger, and fear. To do that, they turned to ancient practices, esoteric rituals, and chemical experiments. In the camp of Sachsenhausen, prisoners were forced to ingest experimental drugs that mimicked adrenaline surges, mixed with extracts from hallucinogenic plants. They were then ordered to march until they collapsed. Some walked for 3 days without rest. Others died screaming, their hearts rupturing from within. A classified Ahnenerbe report, recovered after the war, mentions the project Gift Court, or Poison Court. Its objective, to train SS soldiers to withstand chemical warfare and to test the boundaries of human consciousness under extreme stress. Prisoners were exposed to nerve gas, then revived, again and again, in cycles of agony that sometimes lasted weeks. But perhaps the darkest of all experiments took place under the leadership of Sigmund Reischer, a doctor and SS officer deeply involved with the Ahnenerbe's occult side. Reischer believed that human blood could be recharged, that through controlled trauma and oxygen deprivation, the life force of the body could be awakened. He called it Lebenskraft, the force of life. At Dachau, Reischer built a low-pressure chamber to simulate high-altitude flight. Victims were locked inside as the air was slowly removed, recreating the conditions of an airplane ascending into the stratosphere. At first they gasped for air, then they convulsed, then they screamed until their lungs collapsed. Afterward, Reischer would dissect the brain while it was still warm, searching for evidence of soul expansion. He claimed that in their final moments, some victims saw the light. But there was another kind of experiment, one that blurred the line between the physical and the metaphysical. Himmler, obsessed with the idea of resurrection, ordered the Ahnenerbe to study ancient Egyptian and Tibetan texts that spoke of preserving the spirit after death. In secret laboratories near Munich, they attempted to reactivate recently executed prisoners through electrical impulses, magnetic fields, and even chanting derived from Sanskrit mantras. Some witnesses later testified that they heard screams coming from underground rooms long after the executions had taken place. Others claimed to have seen shadows moving in the corridors, shadows with no bodies. The official explanation: hallucinations caused by stress. Yet one project stood out above all, Project Kronos. Its objective remains one of the most classified and debated aspects of the Ahnenerbe's research. According to post-war testimonies, it was an attempt to manipulate time perception, to slow or accelerate the subjective experience of time itself. The idea came from Einstein's theories on relativity, twisted into something darker. The Ahnenerbe wanted to create warriors who could move between seconds, who could think and act faster than human limits would allow. In an abandoned tunnel system near Thuringia, the SS built what they called Die Glocke, the bell, a massive bell-shaped machine filled with rotating mercury and powered by mysterious magnetic fields. Witnesses described an eerie purple glow, a vibration that made men sick, and the death of plants and animals within 100 meters. It was said that time itself seemed to distort around it. Some researchers disappeared after its final test, others were executed. The project was buried under tons of concrete as Soviet forces approached. To this day, the ruins of Die Glocke remain one of the greatest enigmas of the war. But even as the Allies closed in, the Ahnenerbe continued its work. Convinced that their discoveries could reverse the outcome of the war, they spoke of opening portals, of communicating with ancient intelligences, and of awakening powers beyond human comprehension. In 1945, just months before Germany's collapse, Himmler gave a final order: preserve the knowledge. The Reich will rise again. Thousands of documents, artifacts, and prototypes were hidden in caves, mines, and monasteries across Europe. Many were later found by the Allies, but many more vanished, along with the scientists who created them. And as the war ended, something even stranger happened. Dozens of former Ahnenerbe members were quietly recruited by both the United States and the Soviet Union. Their skills in biology, physics, and psychology were deemed too valuable to waste. They helped build rocket programs, intelligence projects, and psychological warfare operations. The Ahnenerbe had lost the war, but its ideas had survived. Think about that for a moment. The same men who froze prisoners to death in Dachau went on to design pressure chambers for NASA. The same minds that studied hypnosis and pain thresholds in concentration camps helped shape early CIA mind control experiments. The same obsession with manipulating time, perception, and consciousness reappeared, rebranded, repackaged as advanced defense research. And behind it all, one unbroken thread, the belief that humanity could transcend its limits through any means necessary. They called it science. History calls it horror, but the truth may lie somewhere in between, because the deeper you dig into the files of the Ahnenerbe, the more one thing becomes terrifyingly clear. They didn't just want to win the war, they wanted to rewrite the laws of life itself, and perhaps they succeeded more than we dare to imagine. Did you know that, even after Nazi Germany fell, the influence of the Ahnenerbe didn't vanish with the ruins of the Third Reich? It simply shifted shape. When the war ended in 1945, Allied soldiers uncovered vaults filled with bizarre objects, runic tablets, ancient Tibetan scrolls, skulls engraved with occult symbols, and boxes of scientific documents stamped with the insignia of the SS. Many of these items were immediately classified, locked away, far from the eyes of the public. But what truly terrified investigators wasn't the relics themselves, it was what they implied. The Ahnenerbe hadn't been a fringe cult, it had been a massive, well-funded machine, embedded in the very core of Nazi power, merging pseudoscience, mysticism, and weaponized research on a scale that no one had imagined possible. And the deeper the Allies dug, the more they realized something chilling. The Ahnenerbe's work had survived, scattered across continents, buried in secret programs that would shape the next century. The disappearance of the archives. When US and Soviet forces raced across Europe, both knew one thing: whoever captured the Ahnenerbe's files could control the future. Operation Paperclip, the American program to recruit former Nazi scientists, didn't just target rocket engineers like Wernher von Braun. It included doctors, psychologists, and physicists who had been part of the Ahnenerbe network. These scientists were offered new identities, comfortable homes, and research grants. In exchange, they would continue their work, now under the flag of freedom. Many accepted. Some went to Fort Detrick, where America's early biological warfare projects began. Others joined MK-Ultra, the CIA's secret program exploring mind control, hypnosis, and hallucinogenic drugs. And some disappeared entirely, swallowed by the deep machinery of Cold War secrecy. But reports suggest that entire shipments of Ahnenerbe archives simply vanished. Trains carrying boxes of classified material were seen leaving southern Germany in April 1945 and never arrived at their destination. Some believe they were hidden in the Alps, others that they were smuggled to South America with escaping SS officers. A few researchers claim those trains carried something even darker, relics that were never meant to see daylight again. Whispers of South America. After the war, entire networks of Nazi fugitives found refuge in Argentina, Chile, and Brazil. But among them, there were men who weren't soldiers, they were scientists. Men with backgrounds in anthropology, occult research, and experimental medicine. Men tied directly to the Ahnenerbe. Locals in southern Chile spoke of mysterious compounds hidden in the mountains, guarded by Germans who rarely came to town. In Argentina, in a remote area near Bariloche, villagers told stories of lights in the forest and machines that hummed like thunder underground. When Allied intelligence investigated, they found evidence of abandoned bunkers filled with strange instruments, magnetic coils, mercury containers, even blueprints for Die Glocke. Coincidence? Or continuation? The Phoenix programs. By the 1950s, both the United States and the Soviet Union were obsessed with a new kind of weapon, the mind itself. Declassified documents from the CIA later revealed chilling parallels with the Ahnenerbe's work: sleep deprivation, extreme temperature exposure, drugs that dissolved the boundary between pain and euphoria, and experiments in remote perception. The idea that human consciousness could be projected across space. Sound familiar? That's because the Ahnenerbe's own archives mention distant viewing and psychic resonance experiments conducted in 1943 under the supervision of Himmler's occult scientists. The very same terms appeared decades later in Stargate Project, the US Army's 1980s remote viewing program. The same ambition, reborn under new names. The secret societies reborn. But the story doesn't end with the Cold War. Today, independent researchers claim that certain modern organizations, allegedly tied to high-level political and corporate elites, still draw from the Ahnenerbe's archives. Some groups, like the Thule Continuum and Vril Society Revival, openly celebrate the idea of Aryan mysticism and lost Hyperborean civilizations. Others hide in plain sight, disguised as think tanks or scientific foundations. What unites them isn't politics, but obsession. Obsession with ancient wisdom, technological transcendence, and the manipulation of reality itself. There are rumors that fragments of Ahnenerbe research survived not only on paper, but through human inheritance, descendants of scientists who passed down knowledge privately, waiting for the right moment to reveal it again. And in an age where AI, genetics and quantum physics dominate human progress, the ghosts of the Ahnenerbe seem closer than ever. The mystery of the Tibetan scrolls, one of the strangest artifacts recovered from the ruins of the Third Reich, was a set of scrolls, written in ancient Tibetan and Sanskrit. They described a gateway between worlds, guarded by beings of light and shadow. The scrolls had been part of an Ahnenerbe expedition to Tibet in 1938, led by Ernst Schaefer. Himmler personally funded it, believing Tibet held proof of the Aryan origin myth, and perhaps the key to a hidden civilization beneath the Himalayas. After the war, the scrolls vanished, but a single translation fragment resurfaced decades later in the CIA archives. It read, "When the bell tolls thrice, the veil shall thin, and those who will return." The word bell, die Glocke, coincidence, or a clue that the Ahnenerbe's experiments were not just physical, but metaphysical. The bell returns. In 1960, a Polish journalist named Igor Witkowski began collecting testimonies from former SS engineers. One of them spoke of a project buried in the Owl Mountains, a metallic device shaped like a bell that spun liquid mercury at high speeds. He claimed that during the final tests in 1945, the machine emitted a blinding light, and that several scientists died instantly. Their bodies, he said, aged decades in seconds. The site of the experiment still exists today, a strange concrete structure nicknamed the Henge. Geologists who visited reported compasses spinning wildly and electronic devices malfunctioning. Some say it was simply electromagnetic interference, others aren't so sure. Every few years, locals report strange lights above the forest, a violet shimmer, silent and pulsating, that fades without a trace. No aircraft, no storms, no explanations, almost as if the bell still hums beneath the ground. Echoes of the past. If the Ahnenerbe truly sought to manipulate time, consciousness and reality, what did they unleash? Did their experiments leave scars in the fabric of the world itself, or did they open doors that can never be closed again? Some historians argue the Ahnenerbe was nothing more than pseudoscience gone mad, a tragic example of ideology corrupting knowledge, but others whisper of deeper truths, of scientists who crossed a threshold, glimpsed something beyond comprehension, and never returned the same. In 1952, a classified British report titled Operation Cloven Hoof mentioned temporal anomalies discovered in former Nazi facilities, time dilation, magnetized stone, and auditory distortions resembling human speech. The report was sealed for 70 years. Its contents remain restricted. The final shadow. So what then was the true legacy of the Ahnenerbe? Was it the horror of their experiments, a warning to humanity never to let science become enslaved by belief? Or was it something else, a seed planted in secret, still growing beneath the surface of modern civilization? Every empire believes it can control the unknown. Every age has its forbidden knowledge, and the Ahnenerbe was no exception. But perhaps the most haunting thought is this: they were not alone. Other nations, other powers have followed the same path, seeking what lies beyond reason. The dream of ultimate power, of transcending death and time, remains alive, and sometimes late at night, when the air is still and the world is quiet, that dream whispers again. The blood remembers, the past never dies. Beneath the ruins of war, beneath the ashes of ideology, the pulse of the Ahnenerbe still beats, faint but unbroken. We like to think that the past is gone, but in the echo of every secret experiment, in the classified corridors of every government lab, in every whispered rumor of things man was not meant to know, their shadow lingers, because what the Ahnenerbe truly sought wasn't just power, it was immortality, not of the body, but of the idea. And perhaps in ways we don't yet understand, they achieved it. When you stare long enough into the abyss, Nietzsche once wrote, the abyss stares back at you. Maybe the abyss learned our name,